I've been keeping a secret from you all for about 2 years now. I've gone from talking about science to performing it. A grand experiment has been running in multiple different habitats, ones that have led me both into a new hobby as well as a profitable business. So what am I talking about, ladies and gentlemen? Fish. So what, I've just started keeping fit? Wrong. I've not only experimented with different methods of ecological science, but have created what I can assure you all is the perfect freshwater fish tank, as well as an excellent method for making marine ecosystems as well. My most successful tank hasn't required a cleaning in almost a year and a half. And yes, that means no algae scrapings, water changes, or replacement of filter media. This may sound alarming to many already in the hobby, but I hope to prove my methods with this video, as well as let newcomers to the space know just how easy and replicable these methods can be. So how did I do it, and how can you? Welcome back to Sirius Science, and this is how to create the perfect freshwater tank. I'll be brief with this segment, and yes, this is the usual subscribe please part, but with a twist. My channel has recently not only exploded, but detonated with new interest, subscribers, and viewers. I know with recent computer issues it's taken a while for new videos to come out, but now that I'm back in the creative seat, I want to instead thank all of those who have not only given the channel a visit, but who have also already subscribed. So again, and with not as nearly as much gratitude as the phrase can convey, thank you all so much for watching. More videos to come out soon, and yes, this includes KSP. Now on to the video. Back when I was a tot, I had a similar fish keeping experience to many others, a tiny plastic tank and a betta fish with a very short lifespan. About 2 years ago, I decided to get back into the hobby now that I had access to better info and a bigger budget. I wanted some life in my room, and a tank seemed like the perfect addition. So I picked up a 20-gallon tank on Facebook Marketplace and started researching. By the way, this is where my first recommendation comes in: buying from third-party sellers like eBay or Marketplace. You can get tanks in really good shape for fractions of their retail costs, and I bought what would have been a $200+ tank for about $30. I knew I wanted to keep it as natural as possible, which included real living decorations and no plastic or multicolored gravels. So this would need adequate substrate for the plants to take root in. Substrate is a grand term for essentially the aquarium dirt at the bottom of a tank. This can be anything from just sand for decoration to some pretty advanced and costly aquatic soils and layering techniques. I found something in the middle that has worked very well. Now, I have no real footage of this first build, as it was still at the time a personal hobby and I had no idea what it would turn into, but I do have the materials list. First, I laid down a layer of volcanic aquatic soil. This is usually sold in bags of black soil pebbles for around $20 to $30, and there are a variety of types depending on the animals and plants you want to keep with it. Some people advise to put down a layer of porous volcanic rock first, then the soil, but all the porous rock does is to allow bacteria to find a nook to grow in. If you already plan on having rocks in the tank, you may be able to skip this layer as I did. Over this soil goes your top layer, which can be literally anything you want. White or black or multicolored sand, gravel, stones, glass beads, anything. I went with white sand, though keep in mind anything pristine and white will soon become dirty with waste. If you're thinking about keeping special freshwater animals like axolotls, be sure to read up on their specific needs, as they need finer sands in order to pass them as they dig around for food. Other animals may need similar requirements at the moment of tank creation, but this is very rare. Another thing that many people add to their substrates are things called nutrient tabs, or root tabs. They get buried in the substrate wherever you expect to add a lot of plants and will serve to make them more colorful and faster at growing. It's not necessary, but whenever I've used them in the past, they add a noticeable difference in the growth speed. The next area to focus on is the tank water. You can use those additions that make tap water safe, as I first did, but as I learned more I began to favor either purified water bought at grocery stores or buying myself a reverse osmosis filter so I could make as much of it as I needed at any time. To this water, you will need to add beneficial bacteria samples, which are sold anywhere aquariums and fish are. This bacteria will make up about 60% of your cleanup crew. It takes about 2 weeks for a bacterial culture to establish itself in a freshwater tank, and about a month or more for a marine tank. While many of these water additives and bacterial cultures say you can add fish the same day they are introduced, this can stress out your fish and make them sickly, as the bacteria has to catch up with the waste they produce, which will take time. And that might my friends, is basically the nitrogen cycle, that super complex thing that turns off many people who are new to the hobby. All you need to have for a good nitrogen cycle is an established bacterial presence, various cleaning animals like snails and shrimp, and living plants if possible to use up the end product of the cycle. Living things produce waste, that waste contains nitrites that bacteria turns into nitrates, which the plants use to grow. You now have everything needed for a self-stabilizing ecosystem. And yes, I totally get the restlessness of watching an empty box of water do something invisible for 2 weeks. But don't add your fish until their water is clean of dangerous chemicals. You will also need to feed your bacteria while it grows, which can be accomplished by dropping a tiny pinch of fish food into the tank every week that will break down into nitrates. Next, I had to decide on decorations, and I started researching some of the best examples out there, one of which I immediately fell in love with, as I think you will too. The works of Takashi Amano, the father of aquascaping. This man created so many beautiful living works of art that there is an entire roaming museum exhibit dedicated to them. His ability to not only create artistic landscapes with living things, but to keep those creations clean through natural filtration and ecological processes is fascinating, and I guarantee you that you'll lose an hour or two just viewing his works online. So I had my inspiration, and decided on using river stones, driftwood, and a selection of plants from a local aquarium store, which is where my next recommendation comes in. Try to find a local seller of fish dedicated to just fish and aquarium supplies. I'm lucky enough to have one within an hour's drive that sells tanks, freshwater and saltwater fish, corals, and aquatic plants. You may end up paying a bit more for materials and marine life, but it comes with a guarantee of health, quality, and same-day introductions to tanks instead of a few days spent inside of a shipping box. I've also had good experience with shipping animals, even off of eBay, but no matter how good the service is, they will always start out in your tank on the worst foot, battered and stressed. So going from one tank to another within a few hours is always best. Some things like snails and plants can just be dropped into a new tank, but for most others they will need to be drip acclimated, a fancy term for putting a little bit of your aquarium water in with the water they arrived in, doing so very slowly to let them acclimate. Another tip I have is to then transfer them to your new tank in a net instead of just pouring them in, as the water they came in may contain illnesses or parasites leaving from a farm. As for plants, I got a selection of red echinodorus, blood red rotala, anubias, and some generic moss, though the moss was later cut back to almost nothing as it has the tendency to spread everywhere and take over a tank. As for the other necessities, I included an adequate tank heater, full spectrum light, and initially a basic hanging filter, though this was changed from my very best friend, the sponge filter. Sponge filters rock, and any freshwater tank they go into is vastly quieter and cleaner, and serves as both a filter and air stone. I love them so very much and highly recommend one, but not in a saltwater tank, as better filters are needed and they just turn into toxin centers. They also allow fish to spawn without worrying about juveniles or eggs being sucked up and destroyed, and also become shrimp feeding grounds as they clean the sponges of food. I said I had no footage of this first instance of that tank, but I do have a photo I took for a friend. This is what it began as, with taller plants going at the back and a fine grass planted at the front. The grass didn't last long with the introduction of snails, by the way, but I'll show you a picture of what that same tank looks like today. Next, I needed to decide what animals would be added, and I decided to start simple, with a few mystery snails, assorted Neocaridina shrimp, and firetail guppies. Snails are a must-have for really every aquarium, as they are non-territorial, low-maintenance, free cleanup crews that will multiply rapidly. The other recommendation I have for you are the shrimps. Sure, they do be just sea bugs, but I promise you'll fall in love with these brightly colored, lively, and adorable dudes. This is where the tank began, and nothing major happened for a few months but plant growth. Until I saw a flash of movement in the plants and took this video. Baby firetails. Somewhere in the tank, my guppies had laid eggs, and the first spawn were beginning to peek out of the many nooks and hidden crannies they had been hiding in. Needless to say, I stared at the tank in awe for the rest of the day. This event was quickly followed by this rather hideous thing, which is a massive mystery snail eggs. I inspected the larger shrimps and saw that a few were carrying eggs, and even finally noticed several nearly microscopic and transparent baby shrimps hiding in the moss. Maintenance for a new tank over the first half a year of life will be more involved, requiring water changes, glass cleanings, filter squeezes, etc. It takes time for the bacteria, plants, and new life waste productions to all stabilize one another. It's important to monitor your water parameters for the first few months, which can be done with simple and cheap testing strips. If the level of nitrites or nitrates are too high, do a 20% water change and test again, which means replacing 20% of the existing water with new water. Another tip I have is to pick up a tiny, cheap water pump that often goes into desktop water features. This will be great for pouring new water into a tank without disturbing the sand and clouding the water, and at the lowest setting can fill a tank without blowing things around in a few hours. Just place in a cheap 5-gallon bucket of water and wait. This leads into my next tank experiment, a small 3-gallon Neocaridina shrimp tank. Luckily, I recorded a bit of the process I used to make it. And for full warning, this tank did not do so well for reasons that will soon become clear. Reasons that I'd like to illustrate here, as they can often apply to a larger tank as well. Firstly, I used only sand as the substrate, which led to poor plant growth and a slow nitrogen cycle. I did, however, use a design I fell in love with, a 3D printed base that contained reflective tape and an LED strip, that then glowed through some natural quartz chunks I had purchased. This effect was beautiful to watch, and I would later reuse the idea for a much better shrimp tank. The real problem with this tank was its size and inadequate plant life. The smaller of a tank you get, paradoxically, the harder it becomes to stabilize. I use this example. Setting off a smoke grenade inside of a house or inside of a stadium. One has far more available space for the choking chemicals to spread out into, and the other will kill anything within it far sooner than the stadium. Even if the amount of released smoke is the same, your animals will always produce waste, but a larger tank will allow that waste more space to both spread out into and be absorbed by beneficial bacteria. This also leads to my advice on only doing at most a 40% water change at a time. I tested the tiny shrimp tank one day to find it dangerously high in toxins and did about an 85% water change. My thinking was more good water equal happier shrimpies, but came back the next day to find all of them dead. They had adapted to the slowly rising levels of nitrates, but could not adapt to the new water, even though they were pure. Do water changes slowly even in the face of a catastrophic overload, as we still need to keep in mind the creatures living in it. This was followed by something unexpectedly tragic happening in the first 20-gallon tank. I noticed a few fish with white dots on their scales and came to find out that it was an aquatic illness called the ick. Yes, really, it comes from small parasites that latch onto fish scales and is one of the most common illnesses fish can experience. It is relatively non-fatal as long as you treat it in time with a number of brands and cheap options online, but I had recognized it too late, and soon I had lost almost every single firetail guppy in the tank besides a few juveniles. I won't lie, I was pretty bummed about the two experiments, especially with the loss of my crystal shrimp exhibit. But I pressed on with treatments and monitoring for the sake of the now lone guppy baby. He was noticeably sluggish and stayed in only a few places around the tank, missing the company of the swarm of guppies that had been there not too long ago, and I decided to get him some new friends. This time they were green lantern guppies with beautiful iridescent green-blue scales. They didn't attack him, and within a few hours he was smack in the middle of the new school and lively again. I took a break from making new tanks, save for a very small planted box vase of interesting plants and dragonstone. It held only the plants, though I would advise that you not place your decorations right up against the glass as it makes algae cleanings difficult. This tank, which in reality was more of a planted vase, did very well, and served as an aquatic terrarium for a few select plants I wanted to propagate. This one had the same soil, sand, and nutrient tab as my recommendations, and grew in healthy and quickly as a result. Though you will need to do regular water changes on an unfiltered setup like this as plant matter falls off and decays. Some of these plant droppings are actually great sources of additional nutrients for larger tanks, and can be left alone in moderation. But again, the size of this tank was only half a gallon. Ever since this initial dying, the 20-gallon tank has performed amazingly, with all algae on the glass going to the shrimp and snails, and all of their waste going right into a thick forest of greenery. I'm not lying when I said it hasn't been cleaned in almost a year now, as the ecosystem has stabilized its niches and now exists in a perfect balance of new animals and trimmed back plants. The snail population had exploded to a worrying level, which is when I introduced a coolie loach, or as I call him, Noodle Man. He eats small snails and sifts through the substrate for food, keeping the snail population in check and looking good doing so. The shrimp population, which was initially a selection of many different striking colors, has now smoothed out into browns, greens, yellows, and zebra stripes. Every once in a while I'll see one with interesting colors, like this black cherry shrimp that changes from black to red depending on the light. And I'm immediately reminded of my favorite shrimp that was one of the first in the tank, Big Red. Big Red was not only one of the first, but was responsible for fertilizing nearly half of the shrimp population, with his genes even today shining bright. He was a true hero, stud, and friend, and at one point he simply vanished into the moss, never to be seen again. He lives on in many different forms, the plants and soil, and of course his numerous offspring. Well done, Big Red, to the submerged cucumber slice in the sky with you. I've since gone on to create several saltwater tanks, one of which has sustained a coral presence for almost a year now, but this video is already getting long. Please let me know in the comments if you'd want me to make a similar video on these marine setups, as I have similar success and failure stories, proven techniques, and tips for setup. I may put up a poll in the community section if this video gets any interest. But upon seeing some success with tanks, I looked into ways of making a living from it. Yes, really, I fell in love with this that much. I've since started a business in local South Carolina called Ultramarine LLC. I've actually built and stocked tanks and even regularly serviced some. Oh, and also I got on TV.
And our next guest is making science both of those with his students. Andy Pelicano is a Greenville native, and you've kind of created a science and futurism YouTube channel. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing and why.
Well, I had started the channel to test teaching methods while I was studying at Clemson to become a teacher, and I wanted to see.
The business makes just enough to add to savings and to be able to do more aquatic experiments, with a very successful 20-gallon clownfish tank sitting next to the initial freshwater one. I'm amazed at the beautiful life I get to see every day, as well as these two completely different water worlds that exist right next to each other, allowing alien species to say hello to one another. Clownfish are amazingly personable creatures, and will even let me pet them after setting up a healthy and peaceful aquarium for them to live safely in. So there it is, my advice, the methods that have proven successful, and what to expect when getting into the hobby. Again, if you're interested in that video, please let me know, as I'll be keeping fish and creating new setups as long as I can. I'm even in the process of rebuilding the mini shrimp tank, complete with glowing quartz, in order to house triops in a prehistoric tank setup. But that experiment is still in the stages of bacterial growth, and I'll probably post updates by way of the community tab. I hope this video has served to demystify a lot of the setup process and the paralyzing number of equipment choices, as well as instill a new passion in some. This hobby is extremely rewarding, and I'll spend hours watching the swarms of new life go about their business in my ecosystems. But in any case, thank you all so very much for watching.